Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Today, we're going to be talking about public money. In fact, we'll talk about a matter of public money that probably flew under most people's radar screen, but it may sound like you were making a big deal out of something. Well, it's only, 850, $900,000. What does it matter as long as it stays in the hands of people who work for the government? We've got some answers for you, and it's not necessarily a pretty picture, but it looks like there might be some malfeasance, and you deserve to know how your tax money is being used. I've got details coming up.
Press club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, thank you for joining me for Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Twice a week, I have the opportunity to sit down and go over some of the lesser known or sometimes some of the widely known issues that are taking place here in the state of Idaho. This one has to do with Idaho State University and Bannock County. And it's a story that just broke earlier today. Idaho Freedom Foundation President Ron Nate wrote about this, and I'm going to lean heavily on his article, although I'm also going to encourage you, please go to idahofreedom.org and read this article in its entirety, because there's way more information that I'm going to be able to cover in this short video. So what happened with ISU and Bannock County lab money, the anatomy of a malfeasance? Now, here's the background on the story, and it starts with the best of intentions. Ron writes, by all appearances, officials of Bannock County and Idaho State University colluded to keep control of over $850,000 of state money and are using it like a slush fund, even though the law requires them to return unspent appropriated money to the state. The Idaho legislature appropriated $900,000 for operating expenses in the East Idaho Forensic Pathology Center, or EIFPC, back in 2022. Now, the law required that money to be expended only for lab expenses at EIFPC and spent before July 2023. So, the documents obtained by the Idaho Freedom Foundation and the Pocatello for Accountable Government entities, or PAGE, through public records indicate that the pathology center was never built. ISU did not spend all the money, but it also didn't return the funds to the state and instead sent the remainder to Bannock County. Now, records also indicate Bannock County didn't return the funds to the state and instead is spending the money like it's a slush fund. These investigation efforts were prompted by Bannock County Commissioner John Crowder's observations in a recent public meeting. So IFF and Page, together with Senator Glenita Zuiderveld, learned that according to the records, when the original building plans for the Eastern Idaho Forensic Pathology Center fell through and the deadline for expending the funds was approaching, Bannock County invoiced Idaho State University $853,700 for the Forensic Pathology Project. Now, ISU recorded it for accounting purposes as project costs incurred and paid the county all $853,700. So, I mean, look, it's not like they're hiding it, but at the same time, were they supposed to do that? Here comes the answer. Careful scrutiny of financial documents shows there were no such costs incurred for the project by ISU or Bannock County. So the money should have reverted to the state of Idaho. Now, the law is clear on how funds appropriated for a purpose may only be spent for that purpose, not transferred to create reserves or slush funds for officials to deploy at their discretion. So it appears that officials at Bannock County and Idaho State University have circumvented the law. So, what the state wanted. In 2022, the Board of Education, on behalf of Idaho State University, requested $900,000 from the Idaho legislature for operating expenses for the EIFPC to be built on campus by renovating an existing building. Now, that lab was supposed to serve Bannock County by making it easier and less expensive to conduct autopsies and provide education opportunities for ISU students and professors relating to the forensic pathology industry. So the legislature appropriated the full $900,000. But the appropriations bill, H776, was clear about the intent of the legislature to fund operating expenses specifically for the EIFPC by June 30th of 2023. And the issue didn't come to light until Commissioner John Crowder asked his fellow commissioners in October of this year about the requirement for money to return to the state. In fact, Crowder directly referenced Bill H-776, where the bill clearly states there is hereby appropriated to the State Board of Education $900,000 from the general fund to be expended for operating expenditures for the period July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022 for the Eastern Idaho Forensic Pathology Center at Idaho State University. Okay, there it is, black and white. Further, if the funds were not spent in the specified period, they would be reappropriated for the next year, but no further. Quote, there is hereby reappropriated to the Office of the State Board of Education any unexpended and unencumbered balances appropriated to the Office of the State Board of Education from the general fund for the Eastern Idaho Forensic Pathology Center in fiscal year 2022 to be used for non-recurring expenditures for the period July 1, 2022 through June 30, 2023. Again, black and white, there it is. Finally, the authorization for the appropriation states legislative appropriations shall not be transferred from one fund to another fund unless expressly approved by the legislature. So the key here is such approval was never obtained. So none of the monies should have been transferred from ISU to Bannock County. Now, there's a lot more that goes on here, and there's a whole timeline that Ron outlines in his article at idahofreedom.org. And I'm going to ask you, please, just take the time to look at it and read it for yourself and examine the facts. This is not a witch hunt, but it's definitely calling out misuse of public funds by people who I'm certain had the very best of intentions, but nonetheless decided to skirt the law and the clear instructions they were given and upon which that money was contingent. Why does this matter? Because there has to be that accountability to the taxpayers. Otherwise, we become, well, kind of the equivalent of a giant wallet to people in power who just want to use us for whatever their pet projects are. Now, what needs to happen here? Let's talk about that. Officials must be held accountable for any illegal actions taken in creating what looks like a slush fund for the county from money appropriated and limited by the legislature. There was coordination between Bannock County officials and Idaho State University officials to send the unspent funds to Bannock County in April of 2023 prior to the legislative deadline of June 30th of 2023, even though there was no operating expenditures corresponding to the invoiced amount. So such a transfer would represent a violation of Idaho statute and the parameters outlined in the appropriations bill. It was supposed to go to ISU. It was supposed to stay there. They weren't supposed to transfer it to Bannock County. When government plans fall apart, officials must follow the law. And in this case, the law required them to return the money, not repurpose it according to their own whims. Now, whether it was ISU's idea or there was another commissioner, last name Huff, and this indicates that the misappropriation of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it actually violates the trust put in our officials by taxpayers, voters, and the legislature. Now, again, some people might say, but at least it was in government hands. It's not like it was being misused. But the point here is this. The law should hold all officials accountable for their mismanagement of state funds and violations of the trust put in them by the people. The State Attorney General's office should conduct a thorough investigation and, as appropriate, file charges against all officials who've broken Idaho law. For its part, the legislature should, at minimum, demand the funds be returned and reduce the State Board of Education appropriations going forward by some significant amount to discourage future misuse and lack of oversight of taxpayer money. So, what were they using these expenses for, right? When the money transferred to Bannock County? Well, some of it was used for lab equipment. Some of it was used for travel, again, associated with the coroner's office. So, technically, the letter of the law may not have been in play here, but in the spirit of the law, it was kind of being used for sort of what it was for, except the money was appropriated to build this laboratory. That never happened. And when it didn't happen, that money rightfully should have been returned to the state to be reappropriated. I mean, I'm sorry, it probably sounds pedantic to explain it like this, but these things matter. And if we don't insist on fidelity in how these money situations are handled, then we shouldn't be too surprised when we see people starting to skirt the lines or otherwise play fast and loose with what really isn't their money, but is the taxpayers' money. Look. All we want is for people to be responsible, to be transparent, and to be accountable. And if they're not willing to do that, then they need to be held, accountable according to the law to show others that this is serious matters. It's a serious thing to take the taxpayer money and misuse it for things that it was not intended. Again, idahofreedom.org. You'll find all the information that you need there. And this is an ongoing and developing story, but it's definitely one you should probably consider sinking your teeth into. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Press Club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants